And we are live, folks, and it is Wednesday. It is interview day, so I will have my special guest back in the conference room with me in just a moment. We were chatting before we got on with you guys. Charles Mayfield, we're going to be talking about regenerative farming and meat production, pastured meat production at the homestead, small community farmstead level. I think this is a really, really important topic because I'm looking out and I'm seeing a war on food. I know some people think that's crazy talk, but with the number of processing plants and other things that have been burnt down and the stupid policies we've had, it feels like there's a war on food. And there's definitely a war on meat. They want us to eat Beyond Burger, which is like soy muck with beet juice. I'm not eating that. So the more meat we can produce for ourselves, the less we have to rely on them. So that makes it an important topic. Also, I just think it's an important topic because I'm an environmentalist, and I believe the best thing that we can do for the environment is manage ruminants and do rotational grazing and manage other pastured animals, because I think it grows topsoil and it grows perennial grasses and it sequesters carbon. So all of the stuff that the eco people say they want, we can actually do with this. We can do it at small scale, large scale, mid scale, whatever. But we're going to talk about it in a way where you can do it for yourself today. Before I bring Charles on, though, our sponsor of the day today is Paul Wheaton and Permies.com. And Paul's got something real cool going on. He's got a brand new Kickstarter launched just today. If you're watching a live stream, I'd appreciate it if you might wait until the audio goes out to contribute. I do have a bit of an affiliate link for this one. I guess I could drop that in here later. Maybe I can pick it up while Charles is talking, but my little piece might be nice. But anyway, I really think it's worth backing, and I want to show it to you guys right now. It's called Free Heat, and it is an awesome Kickstarter. This is Paul's 11th Kickstarter. A lot of times people are like, I don't know if I want to do a Kickstarter because what if it doesn't fund? Will I get the item or whatever? As you can see, Paul, being a veteran of this, he had an $8,600 goal, and this launched this morning, and he's already fully funded at $21,000. So basically, you're buying into the product. It is funded. It's going to get made. He's got a lot of different packages and ways that you can be part of this. And what I want to do for you right now, though, I just want to play for you the 2-minute video, and then we'll bring Charles on, and we'll talk about pastured meat production.
I'm Paul Wheaton, and this is my 11th Kickstarter. Rocket mass heaters are possibly the most powerful solution to many problems today. Global problems and individual problems. For individuals, one rocket mass heater can save thousands of dollars and bring greater comfort. Globally, if 1 billion people use rocket mass heaters as their primary heat source, it would solve a list of world problems. The only barrier to this solution is knowledge. Last fall, I hosted another rocket mass heater jamboree with several instructors. We taught the basics. We brought in the experts and explored new territory. We built 2 new rocket mass heaters using the best of our current knowledge. We built a rocket heater without a mass. We also tried 2 commercial rocket mass heater products. We recorded it all, and the big Kickstarter question is there enough interest in making a movie to do the editing?
Well, there you guys go. I apologize. There might have been a little echo there. I wasn't smart enough to mute my mic, but I think you got the gist. Definitely consider checking out Paul's Kickstarter. I'll be adding a banner here in a minute as well with a link on it that you guys can use to sign up for that Kickstarter and support it. But what I want to do now is bring on Charles Mayfield, who is returning to TSP. Let me fix that frame a little bit. And last time we had Charles on, we talked about his product, his product based on pork lard for skincare. And I've since tried it. It's a fantastic product. But I was like, Charles is a regenerative farmer, and we didn't really talk about regenerative farming or meat production or any of that good stuff. So I asked him to come back on. He filled out another form. We got him booked as quickly as possible. Hey, Charles, man, welcome back to the Survival Podcast.
Jack, it's great to be here. Good to see you again.
Yeah, you as well, man. For people that missed the first episode, do you want to give them just the quick nuts and bolts of who is Charles Mayfield and how did you get into regenerative farming in the first place?
Sure. Yeah, the nuts and bolts are pretty simple. I did a lot of reading and research. I came from sort of the paleo nutrition community for a number of years. My ex-wife and I wrote a number of cookbooks in the paleo space, and that movement really started to shift towards food access and sustainability a number of years ago. I had grown up in small town America, but never really ventured into farming, and just got to start meeting people like Joel Salatin, Will Harris, Alan Williams, and it didn't take long for me to get hyper curious. So moved up to back home to East Tennessee a number of years ago from Atlanta to do just that, to take a shot at growing small scale regenerative meat production. I've got 2 young kids, and so I was interested in cutting the Whole Foods bill down, Whole Foods shopping bill down. They don't have a lot of those in rural Tennessee anyway. And just started in 2016 with a batch of broilers, a batch of layers, and a handful of pigs. And fast forward to now, we're still very small. I would say maybe a standard deviation above homesteading in scale. But I've got probably 30 to 50 customers between Atlanta, Chattanooga, and my hometown here in Athens, Decatur, Tennessee. And we do pastured beef, pork, chicken, eggs. We'll do a batch of turkeys every year. And then I've got a guy that's helping me on the farm now that's tinkering now with some sheep and ducks. And so we're always looking around and exploring new ways. So,
how many acres do you have to do all that?
I'm on a piece of property now that's about 350 acres.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty big swath of land. Only about 120 of it's in pasture.
Okay.
And I'm leasing some of the land and running in conjunction with the landowner. He's a beef guy.
Yeah.
And so we've got, I'd say total head is around 85 or 90, and that's mama cows, yearlings, and then what's finishing now. So
that's cool. And I think that not trying to go too big too fast is a really good plan for people, because I have seen people pour their life savings into getting themselves a couple hundred acres or more. And I often think, boy, you could have made a much better financial astute decision by owning a couple acres and leasing some land. But on top of it, then they go try to develop the entire 200 acres in 1 year. And they don't know anything about ranching and farming yet. They're just learning. They don't know the first thing about managing cattle. They haven't even watched Greg Judy videos on how to know that cow's going to die and he needs to go to the sale barn before it does. And all of a sudden they're in way over their head. And it happens at the homestead level. It happens at the farmstead level. It happens at small commercial. I don't think it happens at large commercial, because you put yourself out of business before you get there. But, with that in mind, when it comes to species, like you mentioned turkeys, and I've said easiest meat I've ever grown in my life. If you don't let them kill themselves until they're about 6 weeks old, they're Mack trucks. Nothing other than a bobcat can really stop them once you get them there. But I've gotten to the point where sometimes I'm like, yeah, I don't need any more. So in your opinion, when you're going to do this, is there a point where you say I'm going to specialize in these 3 or 4 or 2 or whatever and stop? Or does maybe that number change over time? Like when you start, maybe you start with one thing, you learn that thing and you add another thing, and maybe you still cap it somewhere.
Well, I think, you got to back up to what's your goal starting out? This homesteading model. So if am I just feeding my family, or maybe I've got a neighbor? Small scale farming is a lot like cooking, right? I could spend all the time cooking a meal to just feed me, or I could scale that meal just a little bit and feed myself 3 or 4 meals this week. So, but to answer your question, I would say, who am I trying to feed first and foremost? And, they say chickens are the gateway drug. I would say poultry is the gateway drug. I do like turkeys quite a bit, but I would recommend that people start with a dueling species. So I love the idea of an herbivore or a ruminant species paired with poultry.
Yeah, I do too.
I really like that. Now, this, I'm a huge fan of pigs.
Yeah.
Now you got to feed pigs. You can't. They're not a ruminant species, so you're going to have to deal with some feed. But I think pigs work very well with poultry as well as sort of a synchronized duality of meat raising. And they're fast. And they can. This is another thing when you talk about land. If you've got a budget for 200 acres, great, but you can do a lot on 20. 20 keep you busy for the rest of your life. And when you start talking about sort of that holistic regenerative model, especially meat, marginal land works great. I'm here in East Tennessee. We've got these rolling hills and a lot of rocky ground, rocky top. And man, the pigs and the cows don't care. This isn't row cropping, so if you're looking for a homestead or looking for a spot, you don't have to necessarily have a lot of pasture to make it work from a meat production standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. And what I'll add to that is like something I heard from Darby Simpson a long time ago when it comes to something like pigs. People say, well, I want to get like 2 pigs and raise 2 pigs for my family, and I just want to feed my family. And he's like, don't do that. He's like, you will have to buy more feed in, but it's the same amount of infrastructure and work to raise 8 to 12 pigs that it is to do 2. And anybody can find a way to sell 6 to 8 pigs, which will pay for everything and put some money in the pocket and pay for development and repay for the infrastructure in the first year. And then you got paid to eat your pigs. And that's one of the things I've heard Darby say over the years that made it, enough that I'm repeating it probably 8 years later in this conversation. It won't go out of my head. Like, it makes me think of Greg Judy's, like his ultimate line to me. Greg Judy's ultimate line is, why would you do that? They'll be like, this is a way that you lose money. So why would you do that? And so while Darby didn't say, why would you do that? Like, I fill the blank in with that. Why would you raise 2 unless you just didn't have the room, right? Unless if you're doing like a victory pig from World War II, if you've seen how they used to do pigs back then, and that was like, you were going to raise them that way. But if you're going to be doing it on pasture, I can't see that you don't have room, even with a few acres for, let's say 6 at least. And then you got 4 you can sell.
Yep. Well, and Darby and I have been going back and forth on this for years. And I like also what Joel Salatin said. Your biggest expense is your time. It's, walking out to feed or hauling things out. And so time is fixed. It's if you're going to spend an hour, you might as well do it on, 8. And it's also around the management. So, with proper management, you can stack and intensify your animal impact. And so under very rare circumstances, would I say you couldn't have at least 4 to 6 pigs. Probably 8 to 10. But again, you start reaching a point of a challenging point. I don't know where the break points sit, but I would say, for pigs. Okay, so for pigs, we'll just use general terms. Maybe 8 to 12 is a really good number. 6 to 8 to 12. For turkeys, I don't know.
I'm not sure either, but I've done a dozen, and it was almost no work. Like, I trained them to go with the ducks and the chickens in the house at night. And the only thing I can say is, at the point you're finishing them, the amount of food they can eat is staggering. It's because you're talking about birds that get 50, 60 pounds here, right? If you grow them all the way out.
Oh yeah. Well, and the thing I really like about turkeys is they're way more aggressive foragers. And so if you've got pasture or even sort of woodlot edges, especially if you've got a lot of acreage, because you can move them more frequently. Yeah. Man, you still may have to feed your turkeys, but they are they find very creative ways to die until they're about 6 weeks old.
Yep.
And then they are velociraptors, man. They're just
it's like if they'll bury themselves under their water and kill themselves when they're pulsed. Like they just, I don't get it. But like I said, it's right about 5-6 weeks that they're like, I am now indestructible. And they're cool birds, man. Like my favorite thing about them, you talk about what they forage on, they eat everything. So grasshoppers are gone. Like it is a velociraptor and it's like walking around your own little mini velociraptor flock because they follow you. But I get these things like in my socks or on my legs, these little seeds that happen about a month from now. They start to come out a lot. And I don't know what the actual name of those. We refer to them as beggar's lice here. And they get in your hair on your leg. And if you make the mistake of rubbing them, then they wind up in your leg hair and all. And I could literally call those birds over. And whether it was my socks or off my leg hair, they would pick those things off like a surgeon. Like you try to pull it off and like threads are coming out or your hair is pulling and they go peck and it's gone. Like that just tells you, I know it's not very useful, but it tells you the forageability that this animal has. They are far and away my favorite. And as a small producer, really small for me, they're the most money I ever made because I did literally no work. My system was you come pick your turkey up, you self-process or take it, I'll give you a name of a processor, weigh the bird after it's processed, pay me on the live weight. And honor system. Now, if I was selling 1,200, I couldn't do that. But selling 12 a year, and it's a premium thing, and they sell out. Like I didn't do it this year or last year, but I'm still kicking the idea around. I can still get poults on the ground right now.
Turkeys. Okay, so turkeys are funny because you have to order them. I finished my birds in about 17, 18 weeks, and so you have to order them. You have to schedule to order them like 30 weeks in advance. So you're emailing everybody and no one says, oh, I want a turkey. But by God, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, your phone's just ringing off the hook. There's this real interesting balance of inventory and we had a terrible situation last year in our brooder. Like the second day they were in the brooder, this huge king snake got in there and it didn't eat any of them. But they got scared and piled up. So it was not good.
I've had that happen too, where they pile into a corner and half of them end up dead. It's like the cumulative weight of the outer bunch just like a snake, like a snake, like crushes the inner bunch.
Yep.
What's the general good formula for stocking per acre across different species?
Well, it depends a little bit on your grass. Let's just talk ruminants. Depends a little bit on your grass. I would, for your listeners, I forget the name of it, but if you Googled, like there's a pasture stick. It looks like a ruler. It's probably a 1/4 inch squared ruler yardstick, and it's got all sorts of heights and measurements on it for sort of measuring your cow day grass. But generally speaking, let's just say, the worst pastures I've seen, even when they're flush, are probably 150 cow day grass. So it'll support 150 cows per acre for one day. You can do your own math there. Smaller ruminants, sheep, goats typically are 1/7 the equivalency for a cow. And so your stocking density, I would say if you're doing ruminants, start with your ruminants. I don't know that you've got a big limitation on poultry that you're running behind it, but if it's broilers, you don't want heavy nitrogen load on your soil. So in terms of poultry, you want to sort of limit the annual droppings to like once a year, right? So if you're running chicken tractors or something like that and doing broilers, or my layers and my turkeys all run through the chicken tractors until they're of appropriate age. But just do your math on that. I can't speak to anyone's particular property, but I'd say on an acre you got 44,000 square feet. Your chicken tractors, was that 120 square? Mine are 10 by 12, so 120
Okay.
square feet. And so how many days on the pasture, you do the math and go from
How
there.
many moves can you get out of it? Yeah, because I'm big on, I don't want to bring, even small scale, I don't want to bring the animal back to the same location it was at. I would say with my land, I don't really say not this year, but I probably don't want to occupy that same space more than twice a year when I'm doing tractoring. That's kind of where I'm at with it.
With poultry.
Yeah.
With poultry, yeah. So, and I think this is important to differentiate with pigs. I would say, even almost landscape agnostic, whether it's woods or pasture, you're going to want a good 10 weeks of rest in between impact of pigs. With any ruminant species, it's really more about how's the grass returning. But, generally speaking, you want to let it rest at least a month, see everything, grow back.
Yeah.
So, again, that just allows you to think about leveraging that acre. You're going to leverage it multiple times with ruminant and omnivorous mammals.
Yeah.
You're going to stack that a number of times, but from a poultry standpoint, it's sort of a one and done on an annual basis.
Yeah. And then with poultry, how do you address leader follower relationships? So does the chicken or egg come first? So does the chicken or the cow come first? I'm kind of a philosophy. You put the ruminant through, you rest, and then you put the chicken through.
Always. Yeah. Always lead with the ruminant species. I tell you, it's so cool right now. This is, late spring, and we're trying to mimic nature. And I've got my, our stalker herd is in the field adjacent to my chickens, so I see them every day because I'm out and back to the broilers, and we've got all these egrets and various migratory birds, and they're white, and so you can always see them. I mean, they just come in and they just flock to the cows. But yeah, to answer that question, always follow big poopers by little poopers.
Yep. And you also have disruptors, right? So your chickens come through, and all those cow patties. They've had that. So to me, given the rest is good advice, but you also have time for that patty to get found by all kinds of beetles and flies and all sorts of things. So it's all in that patty. And then the chicken comes along and it's like, oh, all the good stuff's in there. So they tear it up, spread it out, and they eat the flies, the maggots, whatever. And they also disrupt and distribute not only the patty, but the seed contain, because there's a lot of seed that passes through the ruminant. So now they're doing the seeding work for you. And so, like when I talk about not bringing the animal back, and I know you understand this, but just so the audience understands it, I'm not talking about no animals. I'm talking about that same critter. So if the cow goes through, the chicken goes through, and then maybe if that's all you're doing, then nobody comes through until next season.
Well, the cows will come back through.
Yeah.
And here's an interesting point. Okay, so let's say you've got a chicken tractor set up. Okay, that's a broiler, highly compacted, highly dense situation. That's a one time a year.
That's what I'm saying.
Yep. So if you had a portable egg, we call ours an egg mobile. I steal everything from Salatin. I just steal from him. But the egg mobile. So think about that 1 acre. You could bring that egg mobile and graze that acre repeatedly throughout the season, but you're just going to want to park it, again, where the concentrated poop's going to be. You're going to want to park that in different spots. So they'll venture out and forage, but your concentration of nitrogen, which is going to be predominantly underneath whatever they're sleeping in, you're going to want to move that around. And I think the magic number is 3 to 5 days of poultry following ruminants.
Okay.
They say like 3 to 5 days is the optimal time of fly impact, lay eggs hatch into larvae.
Okay.
So if you want maximum dung heap, like spread out 3 to 5 days. Having said that, I mean, I've seen old crusted over cow pats that still get destroyed. And a pro tip for your listeners, because again, you're feeding your chickens. I mean, I have chicken feed. I have to augment their diet, and I'll take a bucket of chicken feed in an old paddock with old cow patties, and I'll hand toss a handful of feed
On
on
the
top
patty.
of those old patties. And so once they peck and break the seal
Yeah.
of the patty, it's game on, man. So
yeah, I had a neighbor that unfortunately moved. They had 2 horses and they needed to get rid of their horse manure. And I have my West Pastures, just the worst piece of my little 3-acre homestead I have. And I'm like, you can dump every freaking horse turd out. And I say, just dump it in a different spot and don't dump it in a pile, spread it out. It can be close, but it needs to be like one layer. As long as you do that. And so I had for like 2 years, every week, they were bringing a cart of horse turds and just putting it in different spots on my field. And that's exactly what I did. I would throw seed on top of it. And then the chickens would just go freaking berserk on it. Ducks as well, but not like they don't scratch. But okay, just so we're clear for people listening, when you're talking about going back over the same land with layers, that's because we're not tractoring. It's more like we have a dwelling and you're doing like an electronet. Is that what you're doing? So that they're not all condensed into one spot, or you're just moving their housing and you're letting them basically free range around their support system, or how are you doing that?
yeah, no, thanks for asking. That's a good point to clarify. Well, you can do intense layer management with netting, or you can just let them free range. Now, layers will go. Think of 400-yard radius. They'll get out there pretty far. So if you're only on an acre, you're probably going to want to fence them in.
Yeah.
And again, if this is a backyard homesteader situation, you might be only talking about 20 birds.
Yeah.
You could almost build a portable eggmobile almost with the same square footage as like an old wheelbarrow, just a little bit bigger, to house the birds, right,
Yeah.
Jack?
Because they're only in there at night, so nothing eats, so the raccoon doesn't eat it.
That's right. And so 20 birds, you'd probably be able to get away with 2 or 4 nesting boxes for that many birds that they'll share.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about a really small, even like hand wheelbarrow type situation. And so you can think about moving that around even within a poultry netting setup. And then you open up a new poultry netting and roll them in there. So you let them graze the 1/10 of an acre poultry net for a week or 4 or 5 days, and you can move them around within that circle every day. And then you open up another circle.
And Green Country Acres is saying ducks love following cattle too. I've seen Lawton. He has a pretty good sized Muscovy duck flock at the permaculture farm in Australia. And instead of doing what we're talking about with the chickens, they literally run the Muscovies and the cattle together as a single mob. And the Muscovies do massive flight control. So you don't end up like out there messing around with your cow and it kicks the shit out of you because it got bit in the ass by a horsefly. Right. And he said the ducks will immediately go straight into the patties. So I don't know if I would do the same thing, but I'm not one to tell him he's wrong. That's for sure, that dude. But they're still running like chickens behind, like you're talking about, but they're running the ducks right with them. And they don't have to do anything to do that. The ducks just like go, oh, the cows are going here. I'm going here too. And because Muscovies are lazy as well, for those that have never worked with them. Like they don't, like you're talking about like your layers. And I'll say that with layer ducks too. Same thing. They'll go, if you don't stop them, they'll go 400 or 500 yards from their base of operations. The Muscovies are kind of like, well, there's the swimming pool, there's a deck, there's some shade. As long as there's food and I ain't hungry, I'm good for the day. I'm going to kind of hang out around here. So, but if you give them something like that where they're interacting with that herd, as the herd moves, they kind of like tag along. And then I've read studies being done with like horses and dairy in both in Canada, where they figured out a certain ratio of 1 Muscovy per like 5 horses or 5 cows, and it completely destroys the fly problem. And it's because they're just, if you've ever, like everyone, like probably once a year we'll have a big fly flare up around here, and then they'll go in the coop, and if there's a couple of Muscovies in there, you just go in the coop and you just stand there and listen. It sounds like popcorn. It's like snap, 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 snap. So I mean, there's a lot of ways to do this. With that in mind, Cuddy, do you have any top resources for people like in learning more and getting started?
Well, you mentioned Greg Judy earlier. I have just started reading it. Salatin's got a new model out, new book out. I think it's Micro Polyface, sort of taking their model downgraded to a homesteader scale. Like I said, I just started diving into the book, but Salatin doesn't write stuff that's not true. He's
Yeah.
pretty well steeped. Greg Judy is another one. I love the work that Darby Simpson and Diego Footer put out for years. Small Farm Smart, I believe, is one of their podcasts. I think that's a great resource. This isn't gonna. This is obvious, but I mean, Jack, you put a lot of material out on your Q&As, and I have found. I'm a recent convert to the survival podcast, admittedly, but I have found a lot of what you talk about when it comes to farming and homesteading to be absolutely on point. And so I love the experts that you bring in and have them weigh in on a question. That's fantastic. But I'm going to default to probably Greg Judy. Oh, Stockman Grass Farmer. That's a great publication to order. I would recommend. But anything from Salatin, especially his new book, Micro Polyface, Greg Judy. I'm trying to think. There's so many. I think that's probably a good spot to start for your listeners.
I would agree. I would say, if you want to do birds, like Salatin's Pastured Poultry Profits is probably the place to begin with that. And then don't be afraid, even with these experts, right, to modify based on your climate. Because like what Darby said, he said in my climate, if I use Salatin's chicken tractor, I cook my birds to death. So he went with a higher rise tractor. So everything's the same, except I think he uses hog panels to create his arcs with. And so if you I would never use one of those low chicken bakers here in Texas. I mean, if they'll die in Indiana or wherever, I think Darby's in Indiana. I mean, here they won't just die. Like you'll go out and you could just eat the bird. Like it'll be cooked if you're running birds through June and July here with this tractor like that. So always adapt to your unique situation. But I think the other side of that is don't convince yourself that you're that unique. I think some people are like, but see, I'm this and I'm that. No, in the end, a chicken's a chicken, a lamb's a lamb, a cow's a cow, a turkey's a turkey. They have the same needs. But I think what makes it a big difference is when we start tractoring. So, I'm really mindful right now. I've got goslings on the ground, and they're not quite big enough to let them with everybody else yet. And we're still doing the hand raising thing so that they don't become another goose mafia. So I have a 25 section of goat fence, and I just made a loop, and we just drag it around like a tractor for them. And I'm really mindful right now with the temperatures we're hitting. Are they in shade? Because if they're not in shade, now they're stuck there. My ducks that are free ranging, I don't care. If they want shade, they'll go to shade. So when we put an animal, Michael Jordan's big soliloquy about beekeeping was they didn't ask you to put them in a box. You put them in a box. You got to take care of them, right? If they lived in the woods, they wouldn't have all these problems, but you put them in the box. And when we put animals into a tractor or like Justin Rhodes' Chicksaw with the netting and all, even with the electro netting in a pretty big area, you put them in a confined space, you have to provide more attention than, let's say, if you're paddock shifting cattle and they're on an acre a day, they'll find a place they want to be. But if you're putting a chicken in a 10 by 12 area, you got to think more. Same with rabbit hutches, all that stuff. As soon as that animal can't choose its location, you have to do the work for the animal.
Yeah, you mentioned Justin Rhodes is another great resource. I'm glad you mentioned him. One of the reasons I'm going to point to like a Justin Rhodes or your show or a Salatin is because they are running such a multi-speciated project. So you can pick and choose, but you've got a very broad level of experience. And I will say this to the newbie or somebody that's just wanting to get started, like pick someone to learn from and learn their system and stick to their system. Maybe end up being the wrong system, but I was guilty of this early on. Like, oh, I can do that a little different. And I can do this a little different. And, it's better it's better to stick to the system of the person you're learning from, get really good at it, and then make your modifications. It's so funny you talk about cooking your chickens in the Texas sun. again, I'm a big fan of the Salatin tractors. I don't know why in the world Darby would do those big things. But here's the question, right? Here's the question. So if you're cooking your chickens in June and July, right, using a Salatin style tractor, well, maybe that means that you can actually run chickens in January, February, or November, December when I'm shut down because it's too damn
Yeah.
cold, right?
Yeah.
And so the chicken is a really interesting bird because it's a tropical bird, right? People forget that. But so almost anywhere in North America, I'm going to say you've got a 6 to 8 month chicken season. It just might not be the summer.
Yeah.
It might be closer to the winter. Obviously, Alaska is a little unique, and even in the northern states, unique. But you've got a 6 to 8 month pastured poultry, non-hoop house model.
Yeah.
It just may be 6 different months.
See, and if I'm going to run broilers here, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I figure I had 3 weeks of brooding, so I don't care that it's cold out. So I'm going to probably put my chickens in the brooder in or around March the 1st. So now I've got 3 weeks there. On third week of March, spring solstice, right? Spring equinox, I'm dropping them on the ground in a tractor. By the end of April into early May, it's time to graduate. Right. And I've not even really got I'm going to say this with Texas, most years it hasn't got hot yet. And meaning that I haven't observed hobbits throwing rings into my backyard to get rid of them yet. Right. But no, I don't want to do chickens in August. And we did it once, and it was our first year. So you can forgive our ignorance, but it was like, we did the math to the first big fall workshop. And we're like, I wonder how these red broilers are, the Freedom Rangers. And we did the math, and we're like, oh, we have like exactly 12 or 14, whatever weeks it was to that workshop. Like if we get them right now, we can do this. And we did it, and we didn't have any losses, but it was a lot more of us having to really take care of them. And I had Josiah here as an intern at the time, so he had to do it, but I wouldn't want to do it again. I really wouldn't. And I also would say those birds, I don't know how commercially viable they are for the American market because they have massive leg quarters and it's really dark meat. And you can, if you cook it with the bone, you can cook it till it falls apart and the bone's still red. It's totally safe, but you know how the consumer's mind is. And then you don't get anywhere near the size of the breast you do with like a Cornish cross. And then I'll say something that's probably heresy here, but I think for the homesteader, man, you wouldn't be wrong for just picking 2 breeds and making your own babies. You know, Brahma and a Buffalo Orpington, and cross them, and then take those babies and tractor them and do 1 or 2 runs a year. And I think that's where this started in my head. The homesteader, the small farmsteader, like what we just said about starting March 1st and ending by, early May. What else do you need? Like, you're right. You could get 2-3 runs in. But if I'm growing chickens for my family and I grow 50 chickens in a cycle, which isn't even hard, right? How many chickens am I going to feed me, my wife, and my son and daughter-in-law and grandkids a year? That's a whole chicken a week all year long. I like other food, right? I have fish, I have ducks, I get beef from Butcher Box and all. Like, so I only need so much chicken. And I think that's something that really makes the chicken like this perfect product for the homesteader for a meat production thing, because you have this roughly 12-week cycle. Done. Right? 9 months, I don't have to worry about it anymore. The birds are processed, they're cut up, they're in the freezer.
Well, and listen, I've been around and back on this. I actually really admire the Cornish cross, like the super industry bird.
Yeah, I do too. I'm not putting it down. Don't get me wrong there.
No, I'm actually. I think it illustrates sort of a miracle, right? Because those birds, it's not fun to watch as fast as they grow, but they convert food to muscle so fast. And your 12-week window will. I mean, God, with a Cornish cross, you're really talking about
9.
cutting down to 7 or 8 tops. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the other thing too, Jack. If you've got a hoop house Okay, so if you're trying to do winter gardening,
Yeah.
and again, if I'm in a homestead situation, at some point you're going to have a hoop house. They're just too dadgum handy in the winter months. Lord, you could almost raise a batch of birds in there every winter, as an offset or an augmentation to winter meat production. Go ahead.
No, that's a good idea. And what I'm thinking is that the right way to do that, not that there's a wrong way, but the right way would be make it mobile, not so much for routine movement, but so that you can maybe move it after that cycle, and put everything elevated for growing all your, because you're going to grow like if you're trying to grow tomatoes in December and January, I think you're trying too hard. I mean, this is greens, brassicas, cole crops. Like that's the money, if you want to put it that way. And I think so I can lift that up off the ground so I don't have to bend my old ass over anymore. I can put those birds on the ground, and those birds, Cornish crosses, they're not going up. They're like Quasimodos, They might in their like first week, like when they first put their feathers on the first time, they might get up there once, but by the time they're 2 weeks old, I mean, because I've seen them get out of 2-foot high stock tanks, but it's like a 3-day window where they have enough feathers and not enough butt, and once they put the butt on, it's over. They can't get off. They can't go over a dish. So you're right, and you could raise, even a dozen. I mean,
yeah,
depends on how big your house is, right?
Depends on how big the house is. I mean, you brought up an interesting, and I thought about this. You brought up the idea of a portable hoop structure. More of a sort of taking what Darby does and scaling it a little bigger. I was thinking more in terms of like a hoop house, a permanent hoop house where you're planting, you're doing your spring starts and stuff in there. You can always throw, a foot's worth of wood chips in there in the winter just to give them enough bedding. The other thing too,
you got me thinking about doing this, not so much in the hoop house, but my aviary. Because I would have 10, so it's 10 by 48 really. So I would have 10 by 32. I'd have to put like a half fence in where I have my little mini pond in there that I do my aquaponics in the spring, summer, and fall, because they'll kill themselves. They'll go straight in. It's a 6 by 9 foot, 11-inch deep spill tray I made into a small pond, and they'll go right in there and they're dead. I've had chickens kill themselves in the little wash tubs we put out for the ducks. Like it's insane how suicidal they are when they're young.
So another species we haven't talked about, which again, this all sort of gets triggered. I'm thinking about it in relationship to the hoop house and stacking poultry in a hoop house, but rabbits, that's another one you can, again, back to stacking, even outdoors on acreage. You can stack a lot of rabbits in a very small space. They come indoors very well. So that's another one.
Awesome. So what equipment do you think is really essential to pasture meat farming?
Portable fence. I'm a big fan of Premier One. I hope that they are I hope that in the future they don't have all the inventory supply side backups that we're experiencing. The netting, especially for poultry, is magic. You can get away with making your own 2 or 3 wire fence for cattle or ruminants or pigs, but that netting is magic for poultry management. I love solar energizers, portable solar energizers. Depending on your homestead and your acres, your access to power. Every energizer. Every non-solar, I use a lot of SpeedRite 1000s and 2000s. And these are units where you can hook up to a deep cycle battery, or it's also got an AC current hookup. But you got to have protection and barriers for your animals. And there's just no better substitute than hot electric fence. Water's the next big thing. And so I'm a big fan of using gravity and float valves. And again, it's very basic technology, but you got to be able to fill up a reservoir and walk away knowing your animals, whatever animal can get water. You don't want to have to worry about running out of water, certainly on a daily basis. So the float valves are a big deal. and then shade. I mean, for your various animals, you want to make sure you got adequate shade. I'm trying to think what else.
What are kind of your go-tos for feeders and waterers?
The Poisson waterers for poultry. I love the bell waterers. I can shoot you some emails or pictures, but if you just Google Poisson bell waterer, it's they also call it a field drinker. It's a really slick thing. It's got a bell and it operates on a spring, so it's got a shut-off valve. That's what I use in pretty much all of my poultry setups, whether that's the brooder or the tractors or the egg mobiles. So I love that for a poultry waterer. I forget the brand, but any old float valve shut off for livestock drink tanks work very well. They've also got the square box, like top mounted float valve shutoffs. Gosh, what's the brand? I forget. But yeah, you're going to want to spend a little bit of money on quality float valve shutoff systems, just so you're not getting a lot of water leakage. And then tank wise, I mean, just any old livestock tank will do. I stick to non-metal just because they're stronger and more durable, and so
Awesome. What are some things you think people need to absolutely not do? I mean, you are at kind of a mid to small scale commercial, and there's definitely some differences, like what I do now versus what I did when I was running 250 ducks, which are basically equivalent to like running a Dexter cow on weight and effect on the land. Now I'm running like 40. It's not even a thing. It's like we pick up eggs and we make sure they have food. Like there was more work then, but no matter the scale you're at, there are some things I think that I've figured out over the years, like don't do that. Are there, you should just say, don't do that.
Don't try and build your own pig feeders or pig waterers. Just don't. It's called the field drinker for pork, and then they make oh gosh, a pig. You want a gravity feeder? I mean, I've tried to build. Don't try and build anything for pigs. Just buy the manufactured stuff. It's less destructible, or more indestructible, and it's designed that way. Gosh, what are the other like absolute don'ts? If you're just getting started, look at every species you're getting and saying, okay, I'm going to slaughter, butcher, clean, eviscerate, and turn that animal into meat on my own land, right?
Yeah.
Whether that be a cow, sheep, pig, turkey, like if you bring the mindset of I have to kill this animal with my own bare hands, even if you don't, right? But I think that mindset will help keep you out of like scalability problems early on. What the chicken's the gateway drug, but man, it happens quick. And so you can get overwhelmed. And so just having that kind of a mindset is very helpful. And again, I would tell anyone, like, pick a mentor, pick a person or a philosophy and stick with that. If I had a nickel for every time someone said, "Hey, you should try this way," and it's like, I appreciate that, but I'm still trying to get good at this other way over here. And so I think people can get in the weeds really quickly, and that's it's not good. It's counterproductive.
Yeah, I would add to it, like one of the big things is don't go too fast, too far too fast. Actually get good at something. Like and I know you said you like two animals, but man, if you can like go, so I'm going to get chickens, right? And somebody said earlier, I think raising chickens for eggs is easier than raising cats and dogs. And I think to a degree, other than if you understand a chicken messes stuff up if it gets a chance, and it will it will poop all over your garage or your deck or whatever. So as long as you contain the chicken either into the area you want the chicken in or out of the area you don't want it, it's about as self-sufficient as it gets. But if you can completely optimize your chicken infrastructure, and I've got this laying flock, and either I buy broilers or I make my own meat birds every year, and I got that down, then when you say, you know what, now I want to start raising some pork, and you go out and get your 6 to 8 pigs, and you raise some for your cousin's uncle's former roommate or whatever, and then for yourself, now you can focus on nothing but mastering the pig, right? Now you've mastered the pig. And if you do that, I think you'll find that you will kill less animals. Because one of the biggest pieces of advice I have for people when you start getting into livestock, you're going to kill some. And not necessarily at the end so that you can eat it. You're going to mess something up. You're going to think, oh, this screen door would make a great top for my brooder, and you're going to put a bunch of baby chickens in it like I did. You're going to take a nice, big, giant steel stock tank, 2 feet deep, 6 foot long, like Tractor Supply had. You're going to stick it out in your barn. You're going to throw your screen door on top of it, and you're going to come in the morning. There's going to be one chicken left alive and a hole about that big where a rat chewed a hole through that screen and went in there and killed all the chickens. Like, you're going to do that, or you're going to get turkeys and like a couple of them are going to kill themselves, or you're going to order ducks in the mail and one's going to come quasimodoed from turning upside down. Like, you're going to have this happen. And so accept that. Do all you can to mitigate it, but you're going to have to develop the skill of being able to even look at a bird and go, yeah, before that little duck starts pulling itself around with one lame leg, I already recognize there's probably a nutritional deficiency in here, and I forgot to include yeast flakes with my baby's food while they're brooding, right? Like, you don't know that, and I can tell you that, and you think you're going to remember that, and no, you're not. You're gonna develop this. This is like ancestral wisdom that if you would have told a schoolboy any of the shit that we're talking about that's so informational, if you would have told a schoolboy this in 1895, he would have looked at you like you're an idiot. But who doesn't know that? Right? Get out of my way and let me learn my calculus in 7th grade, right? That's how we were back then. Today, we lost it, so we have to relearn it.
You brought up a good point, and to all your listeners, I don't think we talk about death in beginning farming enough.
Yeah.
Be prepared.
Yeah.
Okay, so and remember, it's your fault, and it's also not your fault. Okay,
Yeah.
so I think that's big. Jack, I would say I want to agree with you and like start small and maybe just a single species. It is a big jump when you start multi-species. And I would say, like from day one, again, if you're small enough, from day one, like learning how an herbivore or a ruminant and poultry interact, learning that timing, I do think there's incredible value in that. If you're going to make mistakes, you might as well make mistakes in a multi-species type environment. Contextually, again, is this a homestead or are you wanting to do this as a viable, business? But homestead, I think about, okay, I'm here every day. One of my biggest challenges is day job, right? So I've got to be able to be very tight with my stuff and get everything done because I'm gone and not monitoring, and I'm on 350 acres. So there's a chance I'm not staring out the window at whatever it is that I'm raising, right? So in a homestead environment, again, because it's so proximate, we've got a 5-acre or 10-acre homestead or even a 2-acre homestead. The ability to look out the window and see what you're growing is a really big deal. And then again, I love the idea of pairing, even if they're not like perfectly paired, like rabbits and rabbits and sheep, or even rabbits and turkeys. Those aren't perfectly aligned species, but you're gonna immediately know, okay, I got to treat these animals this way and these animals this way, and then here's how they marry together. It's 3 different things simultaneously. So,
and there's some other schools of thought to go with too, and like one would be if you raise 2 species, but they really occupy the same space and require the same care. While my ducks need water, taking care of my ducks and taking care of my chickens is one thing. I make sure there's water and food every day. I make sure they go where I want them to go. They don't go where I don't want them to go. They all live in the same house, right? And then the other thing that this is like, for your case, I say one, but I've always done at least two. And sometimes that leads you to move faster in determining what's right for you. So we have some chickens because chickens are cool. And I found out that the bantam chickens don't mess all my stuff up, right? That's why we have these little chickens. They brood duck eggs for us. They hang out. You can pick them up and throw them on your shoulder, and they don't scratch anywhere near to the level, but they do a really good job of compost processing for us. And basically, I give all my bantam chicken eggs that I don't eat to my dogs, so they make dog food. But I'm a duck farmer. That's what people say. What do you do? I'm a duck farmer. Well, the way I know that is I farm ducks and chickens side by side, and I went, ducks work better on my operation. So by doing a 2 or 3 animal thing, you may discover that sheep don't work well for me, or goats don't work well for me, or whatever. But you're not down to 0 now. Mm-hmm. Like you found this other thing, and this thing does, and then you say, okay, now what is my next thing I bring in, right? So I think it can depend, but man, I'm telling you, the biggest mistake I see is people jumping into this without the infrastructure in place. So we've talked about getting chickens. Mom and dad and the kids are at Tractor Supply during chick days. We hear peep, peep, peep. We look in, mixed pullets. That means they're all girls. It's supposed to mean they're all girls, just saying. And so all of a sudden we go home with 24 baby birds peeping. We're trying to put together a brooder. I'll figure out the rest while they're getting brooded. 3 weeks goes by like that. There is no coop. There is no fencing. Feeders are a bowl, which just is a recipe for rats. Like, you got to get the base infrastructure in place before the animal, because now that, like I said, you put them in a box. They didn't ask to go in a box. You have to give them what they need.
No, that's a really good point. Maybe we should put together a starter kit, PDF or something like that. Like before the chicks come home, have these things nailed down. No, that's
you can even
really
do it speciated, right? Like you could have just a grid. It could be a single page. If you hit chickens, you need these things. And if like when you see a comparison, like buying this model versus this model, and it's like, has TCP/IP, doesn't have it. Then so like you have checks and X's. You don't need this. You do green, you need it. X, you don't need it. Maybe there's like an orange check mark that means it would be a good thing to have, but you don't absolutely need it. So that a person could just go, yeah, we need to get this shit in place, because I see it all the time. I get emails all the time. I don't know what to do now. Well, you need a coop. You got to get a coop. You got to build it, buy it. Like I don't have a magic coop portal where I can like beam one to your house for you. Like your birds need a place to live.
3D printed chicken coop. I like it.
Yeah.
So
build an aircrete chicken coop, and then you'll know how to build an aircrete house, right?
Man, you're taking me back to I'm having a little bit of new farmer memory. Pop to the surface.
Yeah.
What were you asking me?
Oh, I don't remember now. I was going to say though, when you say new farmer memory, like I think that we do have a tendency, like I've been doing, you do a much higher level and much more animals, much more production I do, but I've been doing what I do here 9 years now. And when you're like, just get them and chickens are easy. And you're like, oh yeah, I forgot all about how I killed 20 of them with a rat and a screen door. I forgot, like I remember that, but I don't think about it. And I probably haven't thought about that experience in 6 years. But having this conversation today, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember. I could tell you right now in my head, I can visually see what that hole looked like, and I can remember feeling sick to my stomach, knowing I was actually surprised. We found one chicken that like she hid, and we had to get more chickens because they were little. They were only like a couple of days old. We called her Snow White because she had no friends, so she like attached herself to me. And I'd be walking around. I had this little tiny white peep would follow me everywhere, and like I didn't kill them, but I killed them. And so you tell somebody, just get chickens, they're easy, get a secure brooder, And you know what a secure brooder is. You know that 1/4-inch hardware cloth on the top will stop a rat. But you also didn't even think about that being a problem. My thought when I put that screen door on the roof wasn't keeping things out. They're in the barn. The door was closed. No dogs, no cats, no raccoons, no possums. I wasn't worried about that. Never even entered my mind that a rat would be like, ooh, piece of candy. Ooh, piece of candy. Never thought that. So we do have to kind of like when we're giving advice, pull back and think, yeah, think of all the shit that I did that was wrong.
Yeah, and again, I will point to the work of Salatin and Justin Rhodes, Darby. I mean, I'm just thinking now, like the first time I learned the lesson of if you're going to move small birds, like think about from the brooder to the field, right? That's a move everybody has to make, right? And the birds are still small, they're still a couple inches tall. If you try and do that any other time other than at 4 a.m. or at 10 o'clock at night, those birds are going to go nuts. And for those of your listeners that don't know, a baby chick's talons are like little razor blades. And when they start crawling all over each other, they literally just lacerate. It's like Edward Scissorhands just had an hour with your chickens. And of course, then they get to the field and that gets infected. And so little things like that, little tips and tricks you learn along the way, I think are very important. Jack, again, I'm going to push people a little, I'm going to push them into the water with both feet. I do like the idea of small. The other thing you brought up, which I think would be really smart, again, if it's especially in a homesteading situation, why can't you run ducks, chickens, and turkeys at the same time?
You can.
Right?
There's no reason not to.
Yeah, and then you maybe figure out, because you don't know, and none of us do, then you figure out, well, you know what? Ducks do a little bit better on my pasture, or turkeys do a little bit better given my climate or whatever. And of course, they all have different ages and different lifespans. But
then you also have to, like, if you're going to do that, like, you can run them all together. And when they're all about 3 weeks old, they can all go together. They'll get along. If you're brooding ducks and chickens in the same brooder, they'll usually get along. But if you haven't ever brooded ducks before and you don't understand what happens if you give ducks free access to water, you're going to have matted down, wet, dying ducks and chickens, not just ducks. So that's right. I don't know if you ever saw, I developed I call it the shit catcher. And basically I build a little frame and I cover it with 1/4-inch hardware cloth. And I put a pan underneath it. And then that goes in the brooder. And then your brooder bedding goes around that. And then you sit your water on top of it. Because what will happen is the ducks get in that water and they want to play. And they want to play on day one. Like a duck in water, instantly, it's time to get the water out. Well, if you don't do that, what happens is they build a little bass pond. Then they get soaking wet. They don't know how to preen yet. Then they get cold. Then they all pile up. And then the ones in the middle freeze and get crushed. And the ones on the outside, if they're not right under the heat lamp, they freeze and die. So, but you put the little shit water catcher in there, and then nobody really gets that wet. And again, the chickens will end up wet with the ducks. So if you've never done that before, you're like, I'll just throw them all in there. And now you've killed both. And so and if it happens, it happens. But that's why folks like you and I, we try to educate to these things because, so I had an old mentor one time. This guy was a North Carolina redneck with a Harvard MBA. Dangerous man, right? And he was really good at asking you questions, and I was young and dumb and energetic, and he was good at asking you leading questions that he knew how you were going to answer them. He's like, would you rather have somebody that learned from somebody that's already learned, or somebody that learned by experience? And I'm thinking, learn by experience. And he's like, so if you had a doctor and just as they were about to put the thing over your nose and knock you out, and he's going to do cardiothoracic surgery on you, he said, don't worry, I've learned 100% by experience. How would you feel about that? And I'm like, oh, I see what you did there. Okay. And I think there's the balance. Like, you get the experience, but the foundational knowledge of here's these things that always work, and here's these things that always don't work. So an example of always don't work, putting a water in a brooder with ducks with no mitigation strategy always kills ducks every time. Like, there's no way that it won't happen.
I'm reminded of the Serenity Prayer and thinking about that. Give me the strength to accept the things that will not change, to change the things that I can, and the knowledge to know the difference.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Hi, I'm Jack. I'm a duck addict. It's been 12 months since I killed my last duckling by accident. Right. Please let me have some crappy coffee now. Let's hit some questions and then we'll let you go. Because you are mobile today. For those that don't see the video, he's sitting in his car here. We got a little bit of sunlight cracking the window on him. Hopefully it's not cooking him or anything. Will you touch on how you got your first customers then off your first plateau?
Touch on how I got my first customers and then off the first plateau.
I think what he means by plateau is like, so you got a customer base, because this happened to us, then you bring in more production and then you got to sell the additional production.
Gotcha. You know what? I think this is absolutely applicable at the homesteader level. So here's what I did. I had a bunch of friends. We were moving from Atlanta to East Tennessee to sort of do this, but you can apply this in a very micro. I basically went around and said, who wants in? And I took money. I took deposits of $500 to $1,000, and I said, "You're going to. This is. You have full capability to take this money and spend it however you want. I just need it now." And so I gave everybody 10% bonus. Mm-hmm. Right. This is how I started my buying club. So if you gave me $500, you got $550 worth of farm credit.
Okay.
Right. And so I raised about $10,000 doing this. And I took that $10,000, and I went out and I bought a small batch of broilers and a small batch of. Actually, let me back up. I invested in a small batch of broilers and a small batch of pigs and a small batch of layers. I put that money up and with zero expectations. And 6 months after that, when I figured out, well, stuff's going to die, but it's not always going to be necessarily my fault, and I can actually manage this. Yeah. Then I went out and approached people and said, here's what I'm going to try to do. So, and be very upfront. This is going to be multi-speciation. You're going to have chicken. You're going to have beef, however you want to do it. If you want to do this for your garden, it's kind of a CSA model, give or take. But that's how I got started. And so you get immediate buy-in from your neighbors, and you get a little bit of cash to go, along the way. And then you can also, I didn't solicit this, but you could also solicit their help, their physical help. But that's how I got started. I think initially we had about 22 customers, which again, in a homesteading situation, 22 neighbors, not hard to feed, or at least be a cog in the wheel of feeding that many people. So that's how I got started. And then I guess plateau, like the next step.
Yeah, I guess
maybe what they're asking. Well, I mean, the first step was self-exploration.
Yeah.
Right. Let me make sure I can at least sort of handle this, and learn that in a couple months. It's a steep learning curve, but it's over pretty quick. I mean, I'm still learning today, but yeah, I would say do it yourself first. Make as many mistakes without taking other people's money or commitments as you can. Read deeply, study deeply. Justin Rhodes, Joel Salatin, again, pick somebody and just hyper focus on how they do things. But yeah, the next plateau was I can do this, put it out into the world, into the community, into my friend group, and people were interested. So I got legitimacy by them being interested, and the money to go with it.
So like when we did the ducks commercially, we tried the same thing everybody does. We went on Nextdoor, we went to local shops, and we found out that everybody around here sold chicken eggs for like $2 a dozen. And no one understood the premium in a duck egg. So then we started marketing more like on Craigslist and stuff like that. And that's part of why I did the Duck Chronicles, where we did how we raise the ducks. So then people could look and see, like, without having to come here and tour the whole farm over buying a dozen eggs, they already knew the care that we took, the differential in what we were doing. So we started getting customers, and we went right to $8 a dozen on the duck eggs. And then we started like, okay, we can do more of this. So we started adding more ducks. Then we reached out and we started hitting things like chiropractors, because chiropractors are always talking about people about their health. And they always have people like, you find a lot of chiropractors have grabbed onto the keto, paleo thing like that. And sooner or later, they're going to run into clients that are like, I can't use eggs because of egg reactions. Turns out a whole shitload of people that have chicken egg reactions don't have reactions to duck eggs, and really don't have a reaction to eggs if they don't have soy in them. So we were marketing it. So we picked a few chiropractors were just pitching us people. Then we picked up a restaurant, and then we found the coup de grace, the way to sell every surplus duck egg we ever had whenever we had too many duck eggs. My wife goes and gets her nails done because the Asian community is absolutely apeshit over duck eggs. And you'll find a lot of these ethnic markets, there's things you can raise that they can't get anywhere else, and they will go nuts for them. And so my wife will like, go get your nails done, and she'll fill a cooler up with duck eggs. And like, it's just, she's dealing drugs, man. You got all these little girls out, and she'll sell every freaking carton of eggs we have. So like, it paid for her nails, plus we made a profit, and she's going to get her nails done anyway. And so like, I'm like, literally, you could go to every nail salon and just be like, hey, I got duck eggs in the cooler. And they'll buy them because they don't have another option. The guy I got my Muscovy stock from, he sells live ducks to Laotian community. He's got a lot of Laotians around him. And so he doesn't really like selling drakes to people like me because we don't want to pay as much for a breeder as he can get for a meat bird. So he's selling these birds $35 to $40 for a live Muscovy drake 7 months old. Because that's about where they really fill out and they get that big breast and all. So he's getting $35, $45 for a duck. And he's like, here's your duck. Hands up. Now, he can't sell 10,000, right? But he can sell 100 a year, and it's cash money in the pocket, never happened, gone. And like, when I look at stuff like that, I'm like, there's always a way to get started. Friends, family, what have you. But I think most people will find if they try the conventional next door, local thing, you might pick some people up, but people are, you're such a small sampling of people that don't see value. And maybe now they would see more because now like there's shortages and all, but there's somebody that wants what you have. And the key to marketing is finding them. That's always the key.
Yeah. I mean, I liked what you said there too. Again, the approach of going out and talking to people about what you're wanting to do. This was again, what I did with our buying club. It gives you the opportunity to have that conversation about the why. This is why I'm doing this, regenerative peace or food sovereignty or whatever the case may be. I do like the idea. We used to say, check with your local CrossFit gym or a chiropractic office or a Weston A. Price Foundation chapter. I mean, there's a bunch of different communities, micro communities out there, and you can find them on Facebook or social. I mean, use social media to find them. But, walk in the door there, have a plan. Here's what I'm trying to do. Here's what I need. Who's in? And just see. I mean, it's
yeah. Matthew asked about squab. I'm sure that's something you have like no experience with. I have a very limited amount. I had a great uncle that kept pigeons for totally different reason in Pennsylvania. I don't know if it still is, but back then it was still legal to shoot them like you're shooting skeet. And there was actually big money in pigeon shooting competitions. They put them in a box. You say pull, they pull it. The pigeon flies. Way harder than shooting skeet, by the way. These guys are good at what they do. But it was, they're raising pigeons. I think they're one of the most raised livestock in the world. There's parts of the world where people literally build housing for pigeons into the side of their dwellings. They're easy and they feed themselves a lot. And I've never done it, but I've always been tempted because you can build a trap and like in any city, you can go trap pigeons. And unless you go to the really wrong place, some weird park or something, there's no laws against it. So there's no getting in trouble. So you can source birds for free anywhere. Baby pigeons, squabs, pluck easy. They taste delicious. And a small pigeon that you're taking as a squab is bigger than a dove. So it's a decent amount of meat, but I don't know anybody really doing it, but we'll save it for another episode. But I can tell you how to build a trap for them and catch as many as you want, which begs the question, do you need to raise them or do you just go trap a few dozen whenever you want to stock up? I mean, a pellet gun and a day out of like a lot of farmers that have grain stores and all. They're, I want to come shoot pigeons on your place with an air rifle or a 22. Come on out and do it. We used to shoot them every year in dove season. The farm we used to hunt when I was a teenager, and the farmer loved us for it. Like we'd be shooting doves, but we would put out decoys, and if the pigeons would come in over the decoys, we'd take the pigeons out. I don't know, you got anything on pigeons?
Well, I mean, it's not a wheelhouse of mine.
Yeah.
I'm usually shooting pigeons off the top of silos, but
Yeah.
there are similarities with all birds. I would say I think in his comment he said something effective. He's way far away from the cities. I would not shoot or eat a city pigeon.
Yeah.
There's just no telling what they get their hands on. But I don't have much to add beyond that, Jack.
We got one. What fencing would you recommend for pigs in a non-electrified paddock? Don't do that.
Well, okay. To clarify, a non-electrified paddock. So is this like a holding cell when you're getting pigs? If that's the case, if it needs to move, it needs to be. I'm sorry, it's electric fencing. It's lightweight. Period. If this is like a corral or a place where you bring the pigs to your farm and train them to electric fence, because that's what you're going to do. I mean, I would say your hog wire or even a cattle panel. Cattle panels. And for those that don't know, I'm talking about like the 4x4 metal sheets. I think they come 16 feet long. Cattle panels are cheaper than hog panels for some reason, or at least the last time I priced them. But you got to be careful. If you're getting really, really small pigs, they can slip through the holes. But anything that's weaned, I would say, 8 to 10 weeks old, I think a cattle panel will hold them. But again, to answer the question, I would say hog or cattle panels. But everything needs to push towards training to electric fence.
See, that breaks the Salatin rule too, though, because you're really kind of like, I guess if you're building a little 16 by 16 holding area, sure. But if you're actually putting in paddock to rotate pigs through and you're doing that, you can do it. T-post, cattle panels, etc., and open gates and let them into the next one. But you know what Joel says, if you think I want a fence there, put a temporary fence there. In 3 years, if you still have it, now you can put a permanent fence in, right? And I think that there's a lot of wisdom, because a fence in the wrong place that's a permanent fence is a type 1 error, right? I mean,
let me offer this though, because I use hog panels and T-posts all the time. If I've got hogs to load up, I'll build a temporary corral or paddock in the middle of a field somewhere. So you talk about technology. One of the technologies we got now is these amazing T-post pullers. So I can drop a T-post, 4 inches into the ground just to hold itself. The hog wire goes into like a corral setting. I open up my electric fence. They come into the corral. I can sort. I've got a loading chute over here. I mean, it's very, very simple to do that. And it all breaks down, loads back up on the trailer, and it's out of the field in like 20 minutes.
Okay.
So,
a lot of heavy shit to move, though. I'm just going to say, like a bunch of hog panels and all. Like, I guess it depends on what you're doing, like you said. Let's move on from that, though, unless you got anything else that's really important so we can get you out of here. Fred says, if you live on a quarter acre and have kids running around a yard, how would you keep ducks, like 1 or 2 ducks, and how would you keep them off a ground level deck? I'll take that one. First of all, you don't want 1 or 2 ducks, because you don't want 1 duck. And if you get 2 ducks, you're going to have 1 duck eventually. And 1 duck is a miserable, unhappy duck. Birds live in flocks. They don't live alone. And when you see these cute little videos of the kid coming home from school and ducks all excited and waiting for him, that's because that duck is freaking miserable and has no other ducks. So I wouldn't go less than 4 to a duck flock personally. How do you keep them off a ground level deck with a fence they can't fit through or fly over? And that's it. Because wherever you don't want them, they will go there and they will shit. And duck shit is way nastier than chicken shit. It's wet and it spreads. So we just put like black, kind of looks like what you'd expect to be like the fencing on an apartment patio, all from our front, our backyard kitchen area and backyard deck area, and kind of a beautiful area. We put a big roof over it and all, because the ducks were coming up there crapping all the time. And wherever you don't want them, that's where they'll go. As far as coexisting with kids, ducks and children coexist. You don't have to worry about it. Your kids can play. The ducks will go do other duck things. They can be fine. If you have dogs, then you need to train your dogs that the ducks are not food. And that's more than we can get into today. Do you want to add anything to that?
I would say you're going to end up training your kids to the ducks more than your ducks to the kids.
Yeah. Yeah, leave the ducks alone and they'll be fine. And then you're going to have a water solution, and it has to be dumped and moved every day because they're going to crap it up no matter what you do. And if you put it in one spot and you dump it there every day, you're going to make duckcrete. Duckcrete is where they pack it down with their feet and they make like an area where nothing will grow. It's over fertilized and over compacted. So you have to have enough room to be able to give them enough water. And 4 ducks, 1 standard size kiddie pool, that'll work, but you'll find that it won't last the season. It'll get a pinhole in it. So probably 2 21-gallon concrete mixing trays for that. James says, tractor or stacked pens for quail? I don't know. I did quail in an aviary. I have done tractored quail. It did work. My experience with quail is it's like, when you put chickens in a tractor and you're so happy when they get just a little bit bigger because they're less likely to die when you move the tractor. The quail never gets that big. So the only way I've effectively tractored quail is we actually built caging with large grid floors. So you could just literally pick the cage up, move the cage and set it down. I have not been able to effectively tractor quail the way you do chickens. And I don't think electronet would work. I just wouldn't even try. What do you got anything on that?
No, I have not personally done quail. I've got some people that do it here, and I like the idea, more like a rabbit pen for quail that's got a solid, or not a solid, but like a railed bottom where grass can get through, but they can't. I like your idea. You can pick it up and move it, even though we tend to drag stuff. But
and you can take any kind of anything that's got a small enough grid the quail can't get out and something can't stick its hand in and kill the quail, because raccoons will totally pull the heads off your quail. That's a thing. And then you can take the bottom and you can make that grid bigger just by cutting out. You just have to be careful of any places you've pruned. Like if you use 1/4-inch hardware cloth and mini hog rings, you can slap together a cage like that fast. And it's light, right? And you build some doors on it. And mine are much higher end as far as the material. They have 2 roof lids that open and then 1 side lid. And what that lets you do is you open the 2 roof lids and you stick your hands in there. It's like handles. You can just pick them up and move them. I think they're right on the neighborhood of 2 by 4 feet. And you can do a good amount of quail in them. And we use them even sometimes, I get my chickens and baby ducks outside way before most people do, less than a week old. I start putting them outside and we put them in there because nothing can get to them. Just some additional thoughts on that. Jessica says she's looking to cut feed costs as much as possible. You want animals that forage and you want to build them good forage is the number one thing I think you can do. With my ducks, I've also found make them work. So I feed my ducks. I used to feed them in the morning, and then that way it was done, and I didn't have to worry about feeding them for the rest of the day. Now I feed them in the evening when they get really angry at me and start yelling at me when I'm out on the porch saying, "Hey, asshole, we want some food." And that way they pretty much wipe the food out in the evening. There's a little bit left. They come out in the morning, they eat that up, and then there is no food. So now they go work for a living, right? And before I did that, they would just plow through it. And then they would all be out there bitching at me in the evening for more. So I think that's being strategic about how much you give them. That's not going to work for tractoring. But I think Joel says something along the lines of you figure out how much feed they should get to grow them out, put them on good pasture, and cut them to a 60% ration. They have to work for the other 40. I believe that's in one of his books.
Yeah, I make them work. That's number one. My question is, what is she feeding?
And with our delay, we really don't know, I guess, but I think anything goes under that. And then what else do they eat? We have ponds and we grow a plant called water hyacinth, and it has more protein per dry weight than soy. And ducks love it, and chickens love it, and goats love it. And it's considered a noxious, invasive, species or whatever. But literally everything eats it. And so I have it set up where I have a pond behind the duck house that they can't get to because they will totally mess it up if I let them in there. And it picks up, it mats together, and I take a pitchfork and I have the fence on the other side where we have the daily compost dump, and I can just boom, and I just throw it over the fence, and I throw them as much as they'll eat, and it costs nothing. So what can you grow that they eat? Black oil sunflower is great. I like that because you don't really have to do anything. So what I do with black oil sunflowers, I cut the heads off and let them dry, throw them in paper bags, throw them in the barn, And then when I want to feed them, I just throw a dried head with this. They'll take the seeds off. I've grown sorghum for them, and we just cut the tops off the sorghum and leave it and let it dry. And we just throw the whole tops, and they'll pick it clean. If you have geese, the geese know when the sorghum's edible, and they will totally chew the stalk until it falls over like a freaking tree. And then all the geese and ducks run in and eat the sorghum. So that's actually a good thing. That's self-feeding. Another thing I've done, I have elevated wicking beds. And no matter what I'm growing in them, I grow sweet potato. And I let the sweet potato trellis down. And then they eat off the bottom. And then it grows back. And then they eat off the bottom. There's a ton of things you can do. But you got, no matter what you do, if you don't make them work, lawnmower, you can feed bunnies with a lawnmower and a lawn, right? I mean,
well, and again, depending on where you are, is there a local brewery or restaurant or grocery store where you can just pick up waste? Those are other.
Oh yeah, waste grain from distilleries and breweries. Hell yes.
I mean, that's a fantastic source, and waste grain is. I mean, there's lots of critters that love waste grain. So
I forgot about that. I used to have I don't have one close enough where it makes sense for me to go get it, but I used to have a friend that he lived right next to a distillery, craft distillery, and he was down here about every couple of weeks, and he would bring me like a full freaking blue 30-gallon barrel of it every time he came, because they were just take all you want, and they loved it. And one of the things I don't think people get about that, if I'm doing a mash for beer, whiskey, whatever with grain, I'm extracting the sugar. So the per ounce protein content goes up, right? Because I've reduced the sugar. So they're going to eat till they get enough nutrient load out of it. And I'm leaving the protein behind when I extract the carbohydrate, because the protein doesn't help me make ethanol. Sugar does. So your brewery or your distillery has extracted as much carbohydrate as they can from that spent grain. And that means that animal's getting a high protein relative product. And I forgot about that because I don't have easy access to it anymore. Christian says fodder trees for ducks and chickens. All the stuff Nick Ferguson talks about, willow, poplar, white mulberry, they eat it. They don't really eat it that much until the weather turns and it's the last greenery. That's been my experience. Geese eat the crap out of all of it. Geese you can raise on grass. They eat hackberry. They eat black locust leaf. They eat all of the common fodder trees. I'm actually being very careful with seeing what they will eat, because I don't know if they might eat something that might not be good for them. But I've not seen anything yet that really looks at black locust as fodder except sheep and goats and geese. I mean, they prefer it to anything. Like we feed them out of hand. I taught my granddaughter how to do it, and she's always wanting to feed them now.
Yeah.
Anything on fodder?
No, I mentioned we were experimenting with sheep right now, and it's amazing to watch the different tree fodders that they will eat.
Yeah. And I'm shocked that they eat black locust, and I think you could grow as much of that as you want. People are like, well, there's thorns in it. But with black locust, the new growth has no thorns. It's almost like it wants to be browsed. It's like it encourages its growth. Mm-hmm. So what you'll have is the main trunk has thorns, and then your main branches have thorns, but your new green stem growth has almost no thorns except right in the first notch where it comes off the main tree. And that's what they want, and it must be sweet or palatable, because they freaking destroy it. Green Country Agroforestry never raise livestock that's too big to bury. If you got a cattle, you want a front end loader, man, I guess. I'm going to add to that, because we talked about death. Never underestimate the ability of an animal to kill itself. We had cattle on the farm we managed in West Virginia that discovered Bodark with the Osage Orange. And if they eat one, it's not a big deal. If they eat like 50 of them, they get impacted and then they die. And a cow will eat 50 of anything that it can get its mouth on. We had a cow not die, but almost die from overconsumption of acorns due to the tannins. You got to think about these things, right? Like, so acorns, pigs, good. Acorns, cattle, not so good, at least in my experience.
Yeah, remember, we can die from drinking too much water. So
Yeah. Goats for meat. I guess that's a question. It's in all caps. Yeah, sure. I hate goats, though.
Goats drive me nuts, but it's the most widely eaten meat on the planet. You alluded to this earlier, Jack. If you can get into like a mosque or a Muslim community, they eat the hell out of goat. I mean, part of the problem in the U.S. is you got to find a market to sell it. I love goat curry; it's fantastic.
Oh, I love the goat as on my plate. I love the goat if my neighbor raises my goat. I don't want to raise the goat because they're a pain in the ass.
Assholes.
They are. They really are. They climb everything. I've seen them walk trees down and eat everything off a tree. To me, I think that lamb and even mutton is every bit as good as goat. And they don't climb fences and they don't walk down trees and they don't get on top of your Porsche. Like John Willis from SOE, he had goats. He came home one too many times. The goats on top of the Porsche. No more goats, right? Nicole has goats. They're on the roof of her house. Like, they're just assholes. They really are. But they're delicious. But, I mean, I personally, a hair sheep is a better – they browse. They have all the good of a goat. They get bigger, I guess, than some – the big boar goats and all, whatever get bigger than maybe some of the sheep. But more than most of the goats people raise. A lamb, a well-raised lamb to me will give you more – meat than an adult goat of the type that most people raise, and they're not assholes. It's just easier, man.
I want to love goats because they will eat things that sheep won't eat. They will do things that sheep won't do, but they're assholes. The saying is, if a fence won't hold water, it won't hold a goat. That is true.
Yeah, definitely. And then the last question is on rabbits. I don't know how much rabbit. I'm not a rabbit guy. I don't have much experience at all. Can I overwinter rabbits in a double layer greenhouse of any size with chickens maybe? I would say probably, but you're going to have to figure it out.
I don't know what overwintering means in this context. I mean, you can.
Because he's got hutches. They're outside. They're exposed to the elements, overhead shade and whatever. But in the winter, it's maybe too cold for your bunnies, so you move them into a greenhouse. I don't see why not.
Put the bunnies up and put the chickens down. I mean, if you've got cages, I'm assuming you can put those up just elevate those above the ground, and the chickens will love it because the poop will fall down and the chickens will run through the poop all day. Double layer greenhouse of any size. I mean, I'm assuming of any size. You're going to want to be able to fit everything in there, but
all right. So we got some questions. We got some other questions came in, but we're not answering. They're on like clams and mussels and crayfish. That's not what we're talking about today, guys. But I will come back to you with more aquatics content in the future. With that, Charles, this has been a great interview. I'll let you go now. I want to kind of wrap the show up with closing, so I don't have to do any editing today. But I really appreciate you being here. You want to tell anybody or everybody how they can learn more about you and what you do?
Yeah, sure. The big thing, our farm is very small, and we're not trying to grow right now, but Farrow.life is our skincare company. This is the one born out of regenerative agriculture that you and I spoke about on my last visit, Jack. So people can find me there, Farrow.life. If you're interested, the code survival is save you 20%. Outside of that, you can find Facebook. I do have a farm page there, Mayfield Pastures, and an Instagram page as well if you want to keep up with what's going on there. But other than that, that's about it.
Well, Charles, thank you for being with us today.
It's been a pleasure, Jack. Thanks.
All right, guys, I am going to continue just a little bit here and do my wrap up on the live feed with you today. And I want to talk to you again about our item of the day. And it's still on sale at this price today. And I don't know how much longer it's going to last, but I'm going to bring up the website and show you the product I'm talking about here. It is the Danner Manufacturing Pondmaster Waterfall Skimmer Pump. It's a 2,000 gallon per hour pump. This is a screenshot I have on the blog with the write-up. You can see it's on sale for $80, and it's not listed as being marked down. But the reason I'm bringing this back multiple days in a row, as long as it stays at this price, for those of you that have seen the aquatic systems I build, this is my go-to large pump now. This is the one I use. This is the one I keep in reserve, and I have 5 large systems. So I have 5 of these running all the time. And on top of it, what I wanted to kind of like make sure that you realize is I have at least 6 of these pumps at any one time, because even though this is a really reliable pump, pumps can and do die. So I have one sitting on my shelf. Since they're all the same, if a pump dies, or even if it just needs some TLC and I don't have time for it, I grab the pump off the shelf, pop the fitting off, stick the pump in and plug it back in. And in less than 2 minutes, that system is running again. And I don't lose fish and what have you. When I saw this pump on sale for $80, I have one on the shelf. I bought a second one for the shelf because I've paid in the past never less than $130 for this pump. There's this model, and there's one that looks just like it that's a 3,000 gallon per hour pump. I have determined a 2,000 gallon per hour pump does everything I need in all my systems, and it costs less, but the big thing is it uses less energy. This pump, I plugged it into a kilowatt meter, and I turned it on, and it drew 87 watts. 87 watts, and it's moving, and it totally moves the 2,000 gallons per hour plus. It delivers what it promises, even at, like, say, 4 or 5 foot ahead. It really moves some water. You can see at the bottom, there's a little skimmer grate down there. That's what will clog up with detritus. And what you want to do is you want to pop that off and clean it and hose out the pump about once a month, and these things will last a long time. But with the spare pump on the shelf, what I do when one's kind of gummed up and I don't have time, I pop that cover off. I put that cover in the sun. I take the cover off the new pump. It's perfectly clean, and I put it on there. And instead of getting gunk off, it's all dried off. I hit it with a garden hose. It's clean. So it's good to have extra ones. If you're talking small-scale aquaponics, an IBC and a couple tanks or something like that, you can use the active aqua pump that I recommend. But it's like $50. This is $80. Overkill's good. Just vent your extra pressure with a swing valve. But on a larger system, unless you're talking a really big system, this is all you need. And that 3,000 gallon one, it used to be $150 instead of about $130, $140 for this. It's now $200 because of supply chain. How this went down in price, I don't know, but this is the pump that I use and that I recommend. I also have not included it yet, but I will get it for you guys next week. When I come back, I've been meaning to do a write-up. I have a float valve you can pair with this pump. It costs about $20. I have gone to using external float valves. I don't want a pump with a float valve anymore because pumps die and float valves tend not to. So by buying a separate float valve for the systems that I need a float valve in, I'm able to, if the pump dies, I can just unplug it and plug the new pump right back in and keep rolling. And a float valve is a good idea. When I talk about float valve here, I'm not talking about something that tops water up. I'm talking about a valve where if your water level gets too low, it shuts the pump off so it doesn't pump a thing empty that doesn't need to be pumped empty. And if you do aquatics long enough, you'll have one of those events. With that, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. I know I enjoyed doing it. You can find that product at thesurvivalpodcast.com. Just start scrolling down if you're watching this anytime near when it was published. Or you can also look it up by just searching for Danner, Danner, on the website. And you can always find everything I recommend and help me out by doing your online shopping starting at tspaz.com. That's where all these product reviews go. If you see it there, I own it, I use it, I spent my money on it again, or I would not recommend it to you. And you can also check out my member support brigade. You get a bunch of discounts, pays for the cost of the membership plus every year for you. thesurvivalpodcast.com/members, or just go to the site, click on the members tab. With that, I will be back with you tomorrow. Not live in video, but I will have an episode for those listening to the audio. This going out on Thursday for the audio. Friday will be an expert council show this week. I was able to not do any rewinds this week because of the long episode on Monday. And with that, guys, I will catch you guys later.